we're so glad to be here together in this space with you. So I wanted to start with this image right here, and I'm just curious if anybody recognizes this or has any idea of what this might be. And if you don't, that's okay. Yeah.
National Archives in St.
Okay,
Louis.
Tule Lake Gymnasium.
Yeah.
Would you have a guess?
National Archives in St. Louis burning down.
Oh, okay. Wow. Yes. Yeah. So Diana posted this on Instagram a little while ago, and I immediately recognized it because my grandfather had this exact same photograph in his photo album from Tule Lake. So the exact, like the same kids, everything was exactly the same. So Diana and I then, that's how we met kind of, and we talked about, how did our family members end up with this exact same photograph? Did they know each other at Tule Lake, or was someone like distributing copies of this photo to people? What was going on? And I didn't know what this was a photo of either.
And so actually what this is depicting here is the fire of the Tri-State High School in Tule Lake burning down, I think around December 1945. And what's really interesting is I have a collection of these pictures in my father's or grandfather's album. And it's interesting because somebody was a pretty skilled photographer who captured this image and many others and then made copies of these photos and gave them to other folks because Akemi's grandpa also had them. The interesting reflection that my dad has about this fire is that he believes, and I think it's kind of mostly believed by a lot of the folks who study Tule Lake, is that this was set intentionally, as that was the end of the war, and really some of the only folks that were left were people caught in that tricky renunciant, resistor, protester conundrum, and that were being held back in Tule Lake, like my grandfather. And my dad's memory as just, an 8-year-old boy at the time, he said he remembers that no one was sending their children to this school because Tule Lake was so strongly headed by, the Kibe for one, and the protesters secondly. And this was the high school that the WRA had designed and was managing. And so he remembers it as this act of resistance, and I think that that's the way that I like to remember it too. So together we learn a lot about the past by sharing our stories and referencing, what does each person come to the table with their own family archival photos and records. And it's just one example of how our community work is really very much something we need to share because we're going to learn so much more when we can exchange information. So we wanted to start off with that and set the tone for talking about our family's histories inside Tule Lake specifically, but definitely all of the camps here and all of what your families experienced.
Can I take a picture of that?
Oh, of course, yes, of course. And so, I'll hand it back to Kenny.
Yeah, and for me, this feels especially important, probably like a lot of you, because ever since I was a kid, I sensed that this World War II incarceration history, deeply affected my grandparents, but they never talked about it. And so, the only way I can really understand their experience, and by extension, my mom's experience and my experience, is uncovering this history and learning about it as much as I can now in other ways, right, than directly talking to them. I think we all probably can see this feels especially urgent now for a number of reasons. One, people with direct memories of the incarceration are fewer and fewer every day, and that really leads us to carry on this story, and we need to know the story, right? And of course today, right, the current events feel more alarming than ever in terms of how they're paralleling what happened in the past. and that there are even attacks now on erasing this history, right? So I really feel like now is the time to do this work and to find out your family's history and carry on that story. And so I'm just really glad we're all here today and we're going to be talking about that together.
So the way that this workshop is going to work is that the three of us will present, well, the four of us. Unfortunately, Julie Abo had a family emergency, so she's at home with her parents right now in Washington. So she could not join us, but she did do her slides and a recording, and her information is so valuable. So we're going to play that with her recording. And then after we present, we're going to break up into small groups and discuss and share either what you brought or try to help navigate the questions that you have about your archival material. And I think we have an overflow room, I believe, so we're going to maybe expand out of this room. So I am first going to introduce, I should stand up for this, each presenter. So Julie Yoshiko Abo is an independent researcher and community-centered public historian, educator, and organizer. She's currently researching her family's histories and supporting and contributing to the ever-evolving American historical narrative. Julie is a member and a co-chair of the Healing Justice for Tsuchida for Solidarity, member of the Minidoka Pilgrimage Planning Committee, a friend of the Wakasa Memorial Committee, and a new board member of the Tule Lake Committee. So that's exciting. Andrew Wei Leong is an assistant professor of English at the University of California, Berkeley. He currently serves as project editor for the Tasaku Translation Project, an ongoing effort to engage the Tule Lake survivor and descendant community in the preparation of English translations of all 9 issues of the literary journal Tasaku, which is Iron Fence. That's also very exciting because my family's history was intertwined with that, and my grandpa really remembers that journal in camp. And Andrew is also the translator of Lament in the Night, a collection of 2 novellas written in the 1920s by the LA-based writer Shoso Nagahara. Akemi Johnson is a Yonsei writer whose current book project explores the mass renunciations of U.S. citizenship at Tule Lake, blending history, memoir, and reportage. The book was shortlisted for 2025 J. Anthony Lucas Work in Progress Award. Akemi is also the author of Night in the American Village, Women in the Shadow of the U.S. Military Bases in Okinawa. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Nation, and NPR's Code Switch.
And last but not least, we have Diana Emiko Tsuchida, who is an independent historian and the creator of Teisaku, a nonprofit oral history project and journal series dedicated to preserving stories of survivors from the World War II Japanese-American incarceration. Teisaku has been featured on NPR's Code Switch podcast, NBC's Asian Pacific America, Smithsonian Magazine, and a TEDx Peace Plaza talk. Diana was most recently featured in a PBS and University of Denver documentary, Snapshots of Confinement, which is really good. And, and so now we're going to play Julie's presentation, and again, she's really sorry that she couldn't be here, but she made a voiceover of her slides.
Thank you, Akemi and Diana, for that powerful introduction. That are connected to this larger web of World War II history. Photographs are a very vivid way to connect. We can also connect to our history through documents, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Finding documents at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. as part of reclaiming your family history. This is what I found in my grandfather, Shinosuke Tanaka's Alien Enemy file from National Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland. It's a handwritten letter that my Auntie Alice, who was 9 years old at the time, wrote to the then director of Department of Justice's Alien Enemy Control Unit, Edward Ennis, asking to be reunited with her father. You can see in the corner there, the return address is her barracks address in Hunt, Idaho, which is where the Minidoka concentration camp was. So when I do this work at the archives, I think of them, especially in today's context of mass deportations and incarcerations. The National Archives were established in 1936 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The mission then and today is: we preserve, protect, and share the historical records of the United States to promote public inquiry and strengthen democratic participation. This is from their website. Preservation of government documents and providing public assets for transparency and informed citizenry. It's true, regular people like myself and my parents can walk in, do a little training, and we can have access to these archival documents. This is a photo of my father, Joe Masatsugu Abo, age 85, a Tule Lake survivor, scanning Provost Marshal General documents for the Ireicho. My father and my mother too were proud to be making this information accessible to more people through digitizing these World War II documents. Just a note, particularly in the vein of this conference, Changing Perspectives, we should see the documents for what they are. They are documents that were created by people in the US government, some decision makers, some just civil servants, who were targeting non-citizens, mainly Germans, Italians, Japanese, and Japanese Americans. While the documents have a lot of facts and figures, they also have errors and can reflect the subjectivity of whomever prepared the documents and for whom the documents were prepared. You can see that in the reports themselves. They provide information that is only one part of a complex and multi-layered narrative of our family's lived history. How are the documents organized? Well, it's not like a library which each item is known and accounted for. There are boxes that haven't even been looked at. But for our purposes to research family history, a lot has been accounted for. And generally, all documents are organized by the agency that created the documents, which is indicated by a record group. Within each record group are topics that are assigned an entry number. But there's no universal numbering system, so that is how the archivists are really helpful, because they specialize by topic and they know what is in each record group. And they really try hard to be helpful. So for example, the War Relocation Authority, WRA, is record group 210. Department of Justice, DOJ, or they also were in charge of the alien enemy files, record group 60. And Immigration Naturalization Service, record group 85. So what can you find at the National Archives? Well, there's a lot of information, but I'm just going to point to some of the record groups that I've accessed or put in to have access to. Archives 1 is on the National Mall, and when that filled up, they built Archives 2 about 10 miles away north in College Park, Maryland. There's a free shuttle that runs between them, and it takes about an hour one way. Here are some things you can find at the National Archives. And Archives 1 has the WRA case files. Many of you have them already, but that's a good place to start. They also have the administrative records for the camps. There's also the INS and the alien camp records and individual case files. So you would start at Archives 1. In Archives 2, in College Park, Maryland, you have the alien enemy files index cards that are actually housed there, but they're also fully available online now. So the link is in my slides, but it's also in the handouts. And you can use those to find access to get your alien enemy case file of an individual that is housed in the National Archives. And those are not available online. There are also the FBI case files, record group 65, and the Department of Justice 93 habeas corpus litigation case files. There are also some military records, such as that you saw my dad scanning in the opening, Office of the Provost Marshal General, record group 389, and there is so much more. I highly recommend, if you can, going in person. It's really something to be touching an archival document. And there's something magical at that moment with the past meeting the present. Touching documents that your family members may have filled out or signed is pretty powerful. But here are some important things to consider before you actually go there in person. I had somewhere like 20 steps, but Russ Endo broke it down into this simple advice. Before you go, be sure to contact the archives months in advance of your visit. So you can know availability and location of the materials. With an archivist, you can research a little bit online first before you contact them online. Find out if the material has restrictions, which you might need the Freedom of Information Act or FOIA to be approved. Sometimes it can take a couple weeks and sometimes it can take a couple years. Avoid busy times such as summer months when there are more researchers there and it can be kind of packed. There are 2 really useful NARA web pages that are readily available online that some of you probably already used, but they're also continually adding to these pages and adding some of those finding help guides onto this website. So the first one is the Researching an Individual or Family. It really takes you through what you need to do to find out information about an individual. And the other webpage is more general information about World War II Japanese American incarceration on this website. It shows you all the record groups that pertain to the Japanese American incarceration. Now I'll briefly talk about how to request a WRA case file and an alien enemy case file. You can download and complete the WRA case file request form from the NARA website, but you really just need the basic information of the full name of the person that you would like the file for and the date of birth. It helps to have the head of family's date of birth, and the name of the War Relocation Authority Center that they were incarcerated at. And you can put this into an email. But the form will help you to pull that information together. Of course, if the subject file is living, you'll need a signed notarized permission from them. And if the subject is deceased, you'll need some sort of proof of death, such as an obituary. So this is an example of my grandfather Abo's Tule Lake WRA file. There's the cover, and here's an individual record form that most people have in their files. It has a lot of information about them. I also found this payment record card that showed that my grandfather Tadayasu Abo was a mess cook at Tule Lake. And then there was the short-term pass that showed on February 6, 1946, he was released to go look at a job opportunity in San Francisco. Now I'll review how to obtain an alien enemy case file. First, you can access the alien enemy case file index cards online. The link is in my handout. So you'll look at the case card, and the number for the file will be in the upper right-hand corner. So here you see for Shinosuke Tanaka, his file number is 146-13245. Then you can give that number to the archivist to find the location of the file. And as you see here, there were 6 index cards for my grandfather's file, and you can find a lot of other information. So you can see where he was first apprehended and the date. He was sent to Santa Fe, New Mexico, then Lordsburg, New Mexico, and then found in Minidoka. You can see there's other information that shows that there's an FBI report in the file. There's a lot of correspondence, and etc. So you can find quite a bit of information on the cards themselves. But these cards represent the information that is in the actual file. So you can request the file by knowing the number. Here are some of the more personal items you may find in an alien enemy case file, along with the forms, FBI interview transcripts, and other documentation. I found a letter from my grandmother, Nobu Tanaka, to Edward Ennis, the director of the Alien Enemy Control Unit, asking to be reunited with her husband, my grandfather, Shinosuke Tanaka. And then I also found the letter that I mentioned at the beginning that my Auntie Alice had written as a 9-year-old in her 9-year-old handwriting. Those are very special documents to find. This is a photo of Barbara Batten Watanabe, a Heart Mountain survivor, and her daughter, Rachel Batten Watanabe, at Archives 1, pulling Barbara's WRA case files for the very first time. They gave me permission to use this photo. Retrieving your family's government documents can be a meaningful, reparative act of reclaiming your family history. Thank you. That concludes my presentation. I'd like to give special thanks to Russell Endo and Duncan Williams for starting me on this journey of researching at the National Archives. And I'd like to thank Juno Mori for this conference and Jan for producing it. And thank all of you for being with us today. If you have any questions, you can email me at julioshikoava@gmail.com, and I hope to see you in the future.
Also, the handout, we didn't print enough copies, but if you want to take a look at it, we can distribute it during the breakout sessions, and then we'll also share a Google Drive folder with electronic versions of the document.
So if you, I think you have your email if you signed up for this, but if you didn't, why don't you leave your email with us if you want to be emailed those documents. Okay, so we're going to Diana.
Julie's was so technologically advanced. I was like,
I know, it's just a little.
her face in the corner. Julie's, presentation, I mean, what she has, not only the firsthand experience of going to the archives is so interesting to hear, and she is also, I don't think she'll mind me sharing or offering this, but she's always actually said that if anyone would like her to visit the archives on their behalf, she's happy to do that. I hope she's okay with me saying that.
She lives right by the way.
She lives right there. And I think she really is so passionate about this. So I hope you find that really interesting and useful. What I wanted to share with you today, and just switch gears a bit, is talking about oral histories and the power of capturing somebody's memories. And this is going to be a bit brief, and so that we can really get to the discussion part, but I wanted to share a little bit about what I have discovered through my project Tesaku, which is an oral history project. Some of the overarching themes and ideas that come to the surface time and time again. And I've also shared a handout with just sample questions for you if you are going to embark on an oral history. It could be maybe family, maybe it's a friend of the family. There's all different situations, especially right now as the Nisei generation, is a little bit harder to access. So what I wanted to first start off with is the oral histories that I wish I had. This is really what began my project. This is my grandma and grandpa, and Itsue and Tamotsu, Tom, Tsuchida. And actually, having this conference here in Oakland is extra meaningful because they lived here after the war, when they finally could buy a house for, it was over 50 or 60 years. So they lived at 2445 21st Street, 21st Avenue. So they were here in Oakland. They were members of the Buddhist temple here. This was really their community. And my grandma passed when I was in my late 20s. So I had her in my life for a while, but I never got her oral history because you're in your 20s and you're just not thinking ahead like that. And my grandfather died when I was 8. But just like what Julie mentioned in her, in one of the first slides, there is something that is so magical that happens when you secure your family's archives and you see something that your grandparents wrote, something that was in their handwriting, even their signature. And in my grandpa's case, what we got was 250 pages or so of his WRA file and his DOJ file. for a multitude of reasons. That he was a resistor from the time he was in Topaz all the way through in Crystal City, and he was also a renunciate. And so that in itself leads to a lot of paperwork. And so learning about him through his records, and this is just one page, and I wanted to share this because I know Akemi, I think, is also sharing her grandpa's renunciate file. But this is the form that says, yes, I'm going to renounce my US citizenship. My grandparents were both Kibe, so born in California. My grandfather was born in Loomis, but fully educated in Kumamoto. And and I kind of argue that Kibe really were so much more culturally aligned with being Issei. I think they had their U.S. citizenship, but language, cultural identity, how they saw themselves in the world, I think was so much more aligned with being an Issei. And so his response to the incarceration was met with a lot of anger, bitterness, and I think that really haunted him for the rest of his life. He testified at the commission hearings and gave a 12-minute speech in Japanese, all about what he endured, or he tried to sort of summarize it. So the incarceration affected him so deeply, and I grasped for anything that I can get from his paperwork, to kind of give me the sense of who my grandpa was, outside of the really elderly, frail man that I remember. And so the archives and the documentation has been a source of bringing him back to life for me. So with that, then I wanted to go just over a few things that I think might be, kind of universally understood, but I wanted to share with all of you that what does oral history have to do with the archives? Well, memories that live in somebody's mind and heart don't necessarily show up in a physical document. And oftentimes they don't. This is what's so fascinating about being able to have a conversation with your family and then actually obtaining the paper. And it's really incredible what they hang on to and remember versus what was actually kept permanently in the so-called archive, in which the government said this is what happened. Memories also fill in gaps of truth and counter a narrative that really flattens their experiences and their character on paper. That I have many, many documents that are calling my grandpa, a troublemaker, which was seen as negative at the time, and now we've sort of reclaimed even that word. They would never say protester, of course, or hard-headed, different words, he lost face, he's just, the language isn't complimentary at all. And so, I know, though, through what my grandfather stood for, that is not how he would have described the experience at all. And the value of oral history is really invaluable as we go through a generational change, which we are right now, which we're going to continue to do. It is extremely worthy to do. Archives, though, can provide insight and shed light on information that was thought to be lost. And I actually will just show all of you. I brought the documents just in case it was going to be useful, but this is this is the amount of paperwork that my grandparents or my grandfather had. And so we have a lot of questions that were answered through obtaining their records, because I could then, of course, go back and verify things with my dad and say, did you know this happened, or this letter was written? My grandma wrote a letter very similar to Julie's auntie, asking the Attorney General to please release my grandpa from Crystal City. He was not released until February of 47, which it has to be correct, but I've never ran into anyone else who was held as long in Crystal City. I'd be interested to know if somebody's here who's a descendant of that kind of story. The gaps of knowledge can be filled in with the documentation that was kept on your family. So I want to share 3 excerpts from 3 different Nisei who were of different ages during camp, but I loved these reflections. They just really show, I think, something that has stayed with these particular people for all this time. So Yoshiko Kanazawa. I had a little sister who was born in the camp, and she added a lot to my life. Because I had been the youngest, I was so happy to have a younger sister. She was born at the hospital, and my father and I walked to the hospital, and the authorities had arranged for us to have a car that drove us back to our barrack. That was the only time I rode in a car in the 3.5 years that I was in camp. I remember my little sister crying because it was so hot and uncomfortable, and my father would walk her around the camp, patting her back and saying his Buddhist chants. And that's how he would put her to sleep. So we still laugh about that because she remembers the chants. We would always say, that's how Papa put you to sleep. So I love that memory as a very young little girl in camp, which I believe they were in Gila River. This next one is Tarashi Tsufura. As we grew accustomed to the camp, we stopped going to eat with our parents, and we went as soon as we had our own ticket. And one of the things that I regret now for not really knowing was how painful it must have been for all of the parents because they lost control of their kids. The only thing you had to do was go back to the room to sleep, and in the morning you take off and you don't come back or see your parents until you go to bed, and you don't tell anybody what you're doing during the day. So in retrospect, I'm saying what a painful thing it was and must have been for the Issei group. And that theme certainly comes up a lot. I'm wondering if many of you have heard your parents or grandparents say that really dissolved the family structure and led to a lot of issues that sort of haunted families after camp. And so I love what Tad, wanted to reflect on here in his memory. The last one I wanted to share is from Jiro Oyama, and I'm going to preface it because this memory is one of the more dramatic and really sad ones. But I think it is so unfortunately relevant to what's happening today that I just wanted to show something that was. That it could almost be in today's context. And I know we all share in the horror and shock in which we're seeing things played out. So Jiro Oyama, he was a little older in camp. He ultimately went to serve as part of the MIS. So he says, one thing I want to bring up, it's really a post-war thing. After my discharge from the Army, it happened that my mother exhibited a dementia paranoia. After leaving camp, she was working in a clothing factory. She never took a break during noontime. She would work continuously, and that was abnormal. But one of the reasons why was that she had paranoia of having done something wrong, which is really translating to the fact that her mother country attacked this country. She was taking it at a personal level. She thinks because she was Japanese American, had lost her family structure, she had to live life with her only son, it must have been that she felt responsible or something like that. She wanted to show that she was innocent of any crime to be punished. I remember she'd look at me and say, "You're not going to take me to the police station, are you?" All of this thing stems from persecution, the sense of guilt, paranoia, thinking that everything is against you. I should also note that Tad's mother also went through something similar of a serious breakdown, mentally after camp, and they actually performed a lobotomy on her, and he's openly talked about this, which was practiced at the time, but is so awful. But only came up after incarceration, only after they were resettled in a new area. And so the effects of what happened to our families really continues to run through the generations. And these things to hear, if you are able to capture from your families and the people that are still alive, is so, so important. The beautiful thing about oral history is the shifting nature of someone's memory. The way they retell it can reflect something deeply personal, and really give you insight into how they think, and maybe the facts are actually a little muddled or they aren't accurate, but what's important is what they're sharing with you. And an interesting question to also ask them is, why do you remember it that way? Why do you recall it that way? And it just adds another layer of dimension to their story. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I hope we can chat more, and I'll just leave you with this last message of, if you can, save your family's stories on paper and in the way that they share their stories with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Diana. There's a lot that resonates with me and that I can relate to. So I'm going to be talking about some ways that you can interpret these documents and archives once you start finding them. And I'm going to do that by using examples from my own search. So I wanted to start by showing this card that my family found after my grandfather passed away. And you can see that it's an alien registration receipt card sent to George Narita at Tule Lake. And it's from the United States Department of Justice. And on the back, there's this. So he did his fingerprint, he signed, and then he wrote one line of text. He wrote, "I am signing this under protest because I consider myself an American." Citizenship, he wrote citizenship. So when we found this, like I said, my grandfather had passed away, and we did not know what this was because he had never talked about this and shared any part of this story. And, of course, two things jumped out at me when I saw this first. One, it's an alien registration receipt card, right? So that's saying he's not a U.S. citizen, but he was born in Sacramento. He was a U.S. citizen. We knew that about him. And then two is this line that he wrote, and it includes the word protest. And when I knew my grandfather growing up, I had never known him to protest, to speak out, to go against the government in any way. When I was growing up, my grandparents really did seem like that model minority stereotype, just working hard, keeping quiet, and trying to assimilate into, white America. And this card was suggesting a very different story, right? So instead of assimilation, it suggests separation from the United States, and instead of compliance, it suggests resistance. So I started wondering, do I have my family's story all wrong? And that was the beginning of my search to look at Tule Lake and the mass renunciations of U.S. citizenship that happened there, and the current book project that I'm working on. So of course I quickly learned that he was one of the more than 5,000 Nisei at Tule Lake who renounced their U.S. citizenship, and that's that paper Diana mentioned. This is his formal renunciation. So, a lot of other questions, I had a lot of questions, and really one of the main ones was, why did he do this? What was behind his decision to do this? And so I set out to look through the rest of his archives. And one of the first things I found was his legal affidavit that he filled out in connection with trying to get his citizenship back. So like a lot of renunciants, he worked with the attorney Wayne Collins. And so this is part of that affidavit that he filled out. And this is in response to a prompt about whether his renunciation was caused by fear. He wrote, "When most of the people sent in their forms, the pressure grew toward my family. We were disliked by everyone. There was no actual physical violence, only verbal. But knowing what had happened to some of the other loyal U.S. citizens, I felt that I should renounce my citizenship to protect myself and my family. And in another place on the affidavit, he wrote, I was called an Inu by groups of the fanatics, and my family and I were ostracized. So, when I first read this, I was pretty saddened and disturbed, imagining my family had to go through this ostracization, fear, verbal attacks. I was imagining this whole story. And then I found this photo. So this is my grandfather in the front left kneeling, and he's at Tule Lake. This seems to be him with his friends, perhaps, right? And some of these friends have shaved heads, which I learned is a sign of being a part of one of the, so-called pro-Japan groups, or Hoshidan. So this, to me, this seems to contradict what he wrote in the affidavit, because this hardly seems like he was ostracized and, disliked by everyone, including these so-called fanatics. I also found this photo. That's my grandfather and his brother, and so I learned that they attended a Japanese school at Tule Lake. This is from October 1945, and Andrew knows a lot about these schools. So I'm still learning about these schools, but to me, this, from what I know, implies maybe some willingness to participate in this movement to go to Japan. And then I started requesting his files from the National Archives, and that's where things, got more interesting. I found there was a transcript of the hearing with a DOJ officer where he renounced his citizenship, and this is some parts of that transcript. So here he says he wants to renounce to honor his father's dying wish to take the family to Japan. He also says he has felt more Japanese than American since the FBI arrested his father, and he says he wants to reunite with his half-sister in Japan. So these are just even more reasons that he might have renounced. Also in those government files, there was this document. So this is from the litigation in the 1950s. And I'm not sure if that's Wayne Collins' signature. It looks like Collins, at least. So he might have been the one who wrote this. I don't know who wrote this, but it says here that my grandfather was somewhat bitter over his father's detention, which he felt was responsible for his father's death and evacuation and loss of civil rights. So this implies a more active resistance against the injustice of the incarceration and the loss of civil rights. So, I have multiple kinds of documents. Some are in my grandfather's own words, some are contradictory, right? So then I thought, how do I know the truth? What was really going on here? And I turned to secondary sources. So I started looking at books, articles, and what I learned is that Wayne Collins and his team may have coached people on what to write in those affidavits because he had realized that the government would reward reasoning that blamed other Japanese Americans instead of the government. So, my grandfather writing that he was ostracized and disliked by everyone, that may have been part of a legal strategy to regain his U.S. citizenship. I also learned that in these hearings with DOJ officers, people also may have heard rumors and just said whatever they thought they needed to say in order for the DOJ officer to accept the renunciation. In my great uncle's transcript, he says he wants to renounce because he just doesn't like the United States anymore. So, in these official documents, people lied. People said what they felt they needed to say to navigate this incredibly difficult, unjust situation. There's a good chance I'll never really know what happened here, why he made this choice. It could have been for all of these reasons. It could have been only some. But what I really want to stress today is that I'm glad I didn't stop at that first affidavit, that first source that I found, and just believe the first story that I found, right? Because I think that's only a small piece of the story, or it could be not even true at all. So especially with this really complicated no or resistor renunciant history that was especially buried and misinterpreted. It's really important to look at as many sources as possible, think critically about those sources, do your research, talk to people like we're doing today, and really keep an open mind. And I'm happy to talk with you one-on-one about what this could look like for your own family story. Thank you.
Please.
Okay, I'm Andrew. I'm an assistant professor at Berkeley, and I don't have a direct family connection to incarceration. So during World War II, my Japanese family was in Shizuoka Prefecture in New York. I come to this as a shin nisei. So one kind of thing that I'll say is that there's a very long shadow of incarceration on Japanese American upbringing, even for shin nisei. So my mother stopped speaking Japanese to me when I was 3, and one of the reasons that she said for this was so that you don't become a spy. So that I will always have like an accent or like be slightly off, and so no one will like assume that I'm like disloyal. It was also a period in which I was born in 1981. Citizenship or nationality didn't pass through the mother until 1984. So I'm not registered on a koseki. I don't exist as a Japanese person. So these kind of like long effects of national belonging or national language really have long-lasting effects. And my Japanese language, I guess, relearning journey really started in graduate school when I was in my 20s. So part of what is informing the approach that I'm taking here is an understanding that many of you might have gone to maybe a little bit of like Japanese language school as children, or taken a few classes in college or high school or something like that. And really to encourage a way of thinking about working with finding and identifying Japanese language family documents that do not rely on what I think is a really toxic idea that you need to be like perfectly fluent or like get like all the mastery of Japanese for years before you can even start working with documents. I think that that's really damaging, and one way of thinking about a reparative process is to work from where you are and to rebuild Japanese language awareness, and that takes smaller steps to do so. So let's see if I... Nope, that's not going to work. Okay, I'm going to use this version of the document instead. Okay. So the first place, and you should have a handout there, thank you, is to really start by thinking about the most basic things, so names and dates. And one of the places you can begin is by really thinking about surnames or family names, or sei, versus personal names. And one thing to think about is it's generally easier to find the kanji for family names or surnames because they're generally common, they're shared, they're repeated, than it is for personal names. One of the challenges of identifying the kanji for personal names is that kanji for names can be very elaborate or strange or unusual. This is like 12 different ways of reading Hiroshi, which is a very common name, but the kanji might be completely different. There might be conflicting records or different kinds of transcriptions in Japanese documents, depending upon who's writing them, where they're printed. And so it's generally better to maybe start with identifying your family name or surname, because that will be more consistent. And then I'll go through how to use some dictionary resources to find your likely kanji for your family name. But you can, if you're working on a computer or a phone, just copy and paste it into a consistent document so that you don't have to learn Romaji or re-enter or double-check all the time. Just save it into a place that you can copy and paste it into different kinds of search functions, or share it with other folks that you might be talking to. So there are a couple of different resources that I put on the link in the handout, and you can, explore them a little bit later. But these are name dictionaries. I like using the Jim Green one because it's free to use and doesn't have pop-up ads. The Tangorin one is free to use but has really annoying ads that can sometimes interfere with that. But what these dictionaries will do is if you enter in the Romaji or an English spelling of a last name, will generally give you an idea of what the most likely kanji are for your family name. And so this is what the interface looks like. It's very basic, but if you click on something like search using Romanized Japanese, and then put in, this is my mother's maiden name, it's not a security question on any of my bank accounts, Matsumoto, right, then if you do this, then it will come up with what it is in hiragana here, Matsumoto, and then pine tree and root, right, Matsumoto. And then you can copy and paste this into a Google document or a word processing document just so that you have it and can use it.
Are all four of those
So-
depiction?
So this is Matsumoto. The most common reading is Matsumoto, but it can also be read as Masamoto, Masumoto, and Matsuhon. But these are slightly more rare readings of what those are. If any of you are of Okinawan heritage, there can also be differences between Okinawan readings of a surname and the Tokyo Japanese versions of a surname. So, for instance, Masashiro might be something like a more use of things like buku or puku as endings for last names too. So these can give you more rare readings of what this surname can. And here, a good thing to know about this is that surnames are generally labeled with an S. There are also a very large number of place names that are also on this. So like P, I think, is the annotation for place names for this purpose, as well as other kinds of unusual readings. But generally, if you go to the ones at the top, you'll be more likely to get ones that are right. A more rare way of writing Matsumoto might be this or something like that. So you could play around and look. But if you're using this as a way to then start to look at some handwritten documents or letters, then you can also see if there's a potential match between what you've generated as likely possible kanji for your ancestors' families' names, and then see where and how they might show up on address documents or things like that. If you are working from, say, a letter and there are also ways of looking up kanji, that kind of upper right border. You can use that in order to kind of get a guess of what the pronunciation of those characters might be. You might be able to identify, oh, this is Matsumoto Ken, right? And kind of get a sense of who the letters for, from, about. Those are kinds of approaches that you can take. The other kind of quick and dirty method is to use Wikipedia. So one thing is that if you're writing a last name and you enter that in, the first articles will go to the most commonly used versions of that last name. And generally the first entry will contain like a Japanese language version of this. So if your surname is more common, then you can find versions like this. But this is also true for more unusual surnames as well. The next thing that you might want to try once you generate a sense of surname, or if you can find a document that has personal names or something like that, is that there are now digitized versions of Japanese American newspapers, both in Japanese and English. They're available at this website, the hojishinbun.org. Rafashimpo also has a digitized version that's accessible through some public and university libraries. And you can enter in the family name or name, location. If you know something about a family having a pre-war business, a hotel, flower business or something like that, you might be able to find a business directory or advertisement entry or something along those lines and build out your record searches that way. If your family is particularly prominent, they might be listed in the Zaibei Nihonjinshi, or the history of Japanese in America. And these are searchable both in the Japanese, but also there's a rough English translation that's available, and you might be able to cross-reference the two entries and see what's going on there. This is a kind of indication of what this reference document looks like. And here, what I've done is done a search for Ina Itaru, the poet that shows up in the Tesaku. And one thing that you can do is when you have Ina is the surname here, it's a relatively unusual surname, so it's easier to find than, say, if you had like Tanaka or Matsumoto or Sato or something like that. And here, this will pop up examples of Ina Itaru's poetry. You can kind of tell by the single rows and then what look like many names listed here. And it can be helpful to just start gathering these, saving the documents, saving page images, and then you can start working with them or sharing them with folks that might be able to provide more information or context for these materials. Here, this is an example of using a last name. This is an author I translated, and searching in the Zaibei Nihonjinshi and seeing what appears in that way and seeing what that looks like. There's a large kind of family directory or business directory in this resource, and so it might be something to try even using the English language record. And then because it's a bilingual edition, if you matched the chapter and location from the rough English translation version with the Japanese version, you might be able to do some matching that way. We live in an age of monsters and wonders, so there are now increasingly powerful smartphone-based apps where some of you may have used this for travel. Like if you take your phone and load Google Translate or Yomiwa or other apps, you can take, especially if it's a printed document, a newspaper document, get a rough idea of what the text might be. There's some significant limitations here, and there are differences between Japanese as written in the United States as opposed to Japanese as written in standard, mainland Japanese or home island Japanese. But if you're doing just kind of a rough guess about what these printed documents might look like, this is another way to get started with that. We're not yet at a stage where looking at routine handwritten Japanese language documents works that well with these kinds of applications, especially if it's written in cursive or if your ancestors happen to have really idiosyncratic handwriting. But my suggestion here, and often a place to start when when I work with these kinds of documents, is looking for the easiest kinds of kanji or words to look at first. So identifying key names, that's why you might look for the surname or look for individual personal names, and then dates, because those are really consistent kanji characters or numbers even that will appear, and you can get a sense of, is this a letter? Is this a diary? Is this being addressed in this kind of context? There are good guides for reading the common kanji that appear in Japanese states. In Akemi's the school photograph example, there are also instances where it will be an imperial reign date, like Showa, probably not Reiwa, but Showa, Meiji, Taisho, or something like that. And there are good references for helping you match what an imperial reign date is or reign year is to the Western Gregorian year system. And then if you can read katakana or want to dust that off, then you can also, and this is one great thing about Japanese letters and diaries written in the United States, there are a large number of katakana loan words that appear, and you can start to guess what the content of the letter is by starting with the things that are most easy to read and most legible in the document, and start to piece together an initial sense of what the documents mean there. So ultimately, language is a communicative act, and part of work of repair with working with Japanese language documents, photographs, and the materials is really thinking about who might be in your extended networks of acquaintances, in a church group, temple group, taiko groups, martial arts groups, dance, flower arrangement, tea ceremony, cultural and community centers, if you are involved in senior activities or activist advocacy organizations, reach out to folks that read or speak Japanese. And the idea here is that it may be inappropriate to ask someone to take on large amounts of uncompensated translation labor, but for initial help or guidance, or like identifying what the document is, I mean, you can do skills or like a barter exchange or something along those lines. So that you can help build a relationship of trust with the Japanese speaker or reader in your extended community. And then the last thing I'll say here is, if you have a specific inquiry or follow-up question, or if you have friends or family that have similar questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at my email address, and I'll try to answer your question, or if I can't, I'll try to put you in touch with someone who can. It's one of my favorite things to do, to like solve a translation puzzle, or take and identify what an object is, or what a letter is. So this is kind of the inverse of the summer months rule. During the academic year, I may be a little slow to respond, but during the summer months, things can be a little bit easier. Thank you.
Oh, I'd also say that like Find Your Family's Kanji, someone recently is letting me borrow a book of, it's like a phone book of all the Japanese Americans in the United States. So if anyone wants to email me, I'll take a picture if I find it in the book.
Okay, maybe you can share, if anyone can come up to you and ask for your email address.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe you could write it on the board.
if you're comfortable. Yeah.
So I don't know if we have but maybe
Oh, that's a problem.
we may be able to just type it in.
Yeah. It's Michelle, Kiniko, K-I-N-U-K-O, and then Huey, H-U-E-Y. Oh, no, sorry, Michelle at,
Okay.
yeah, at gmail.com.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I know that there was a wait list for this workshop, and I see that you're filming it. Is there a way to, and it was so much information that I didn't get it all?
It will be on YouTube.
YouTube.
Yes,
So
on
how do I
the
look it up?
Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimage's YouTube channel. And I don't know if they'll send everyone an email about that, but you can check there. I don't know how long it will take.
That's what she said.
Yeah.
If you could get a hold of Kimiko Mar, she's in charge of all this YouTube.
It'll be online, so don't worry. And if you didn't get the
You'll
handout,
probably
you can
get a
also
follow-up
email
email.
that. Yeah.
Oh, I will?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think so.
Okay,
If
so
you didn't register, can we do a
yes,
sheet?
and if you didn't register and you want to give us your email address so we can send you handouts, then please come up to one of us and share your email address. So we're gonna use the rest of the time to split into small groups, and so you can talk with us, you can talk with each other about what items you might have brought or what you're trying to do, where you are in your search, and we can circulate. There's also some genealogists in the room, so Janice, and there one more. Okay, over there, yeah, what your name is?